from me from Castle Goring. Well, I have an awful lot of ground to cover today. In fact, I could have done 3 one-hour videos on all the ground that I should be covering, but I'm afraid I do not intend to over-egg the pudding. So I am not going to be doing 3 one-hour videos. Hopefully, I won't even do 1 one-hour video. So, if I may, I will therefore plunge right in with Nikki's permission. Boudica says, oh, and I should say before I start, we're lightly touching upon the tiresome duo, and then we're plunging into something rather more momentous, okay? So we'll start with levity of a sort, and then we're going to go to something that's somewhat more serious. So Boudica says, is it just me? I don't understand the relationship between just accepting £1 damages for the privacy claim and avoiding paying all the male's costs. What was all that about lodging more than £1 with the court and Meghan Markle having to take the minimum? Can anyone explain? Okay, I will explain it. In lawsuits, if the damages are lower than the amount tendered by the other side as an offer, or paid into court is really the term, because they pay into court a specific sum, and if the litigant beats that sum, for argument's sake, say £10, okay? If you pay £10 into court and the award is £9, you have to pay not only your own costs, but the other side's costs. That is the significance of the £1 of damages. And the mere fact that £1 has been mentioned as a part of the settlement should tell you something. Because if it were a meaningless statement, it wouldn't have been included. The mere fact it was included tells me, at any rate, that Meghan has lost that part of the action. She has won in much the same way that Dr. Daring won against Leon Uris and William Kember and co. He won, but he lost, because winning is not enough. You have to win properly. So, Cheryl R. Lee says, and I'm not going to step on her toes, so I'm going to read the question. She says, I just read via the Washington Post that Meghan was provided a secret payment from the Mail on Sunday, which is in addition to her $2 million legal fees, which they were also required to pay. Well, I read that the Tooth Fairy is coming to Castle Goring in half a minute away from it. Mickey, be on guard. Catch that Tooth Fairy. Mickey, come on, catch the Tooth. Mickey, go on, catch the Tooth Fairy for Matty. Go on, catch it, catch it. Mickey says she doesn't see a Tooth Fairy. Do we get the point? In case the point escapes someone, I'm going to use a hammer and hammer it home. $2 million in legal costs with a damages award of £1 for the main part of the case? Mickey, catch that tooth fairy. See, it's flying, it's buzzing around. Oh, it alighted upon the Washington Post's pages. Just ridiculous. Just ridiculous. You know, I have to say, the constant barrage of nonsense with which the public is assailed on a daily basis by Meghan, Harry and their PR people is enough to turn anybody's stomach, really. Joe Vickers says, with many comments, I'm guessing you won't see my question. How wrong you are, Joe Vickers. I saw it and I'm reading it out. Do you think Charles is behind Mr. Blair getting a knighthood? The reason I say this is that the first in line to the throne and head of the Church of England under the Marriage Act is not allowed to marry someone who is still married. Camilla married Andrew Parker Bowles in a Roman Catholic church. He is still alive, and as the Roman Catholic Church does not recognize divorce, Charles could not marry her if he wanted to become king one day. Mr. Blair should have warned and advised Charles to postpone the wedding until Mr. Parker Bowles died. It seems he did not and therefore ignored the law, perhaps hoping no one would know. Could this knighthood be what is effectively going to keep Mr. Blair quiet? If you read this question, I'm sure you know much more about such things than I do. So please enlighten us. Thank you and Happy New Year to you and Mickey. Mickey says, Happy New Year to you too, but that flying tooth fairy is eluding her. Oh, Mickey, I think actually Megsy Baby sent a flying pig. Try catch that instead. Well, Joe Vickers, first of all, the rules of the Roman Catholic Church have absolutely no force in this kingdom. They haven't had any force since 1533 when Henry VIII married Anne Boleyn. Had they had force in this country then or now, Henry VIII could not have married Anne Boleyn because he was married in the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church refused to annul his marriage. I'm not quite sure which marriage act you are referring to, but whatever the act is, the Roman Catholic Church's role in this country is effectively non-existent legally. Any Catholic can remarry, or Protestant, or anything else in this country, can marry anybody they choose to validly. Nowadays, it doesn't even have to be man and woman. It can be man and man, woman and woman. So I'm afraid that you are somewhat mistaken, because in fact the issue of the validity of the marriage came up, and Lord Falconer, who was the chief, I think he was the Lord Chancellor at the time. I think it was still called Lord Chancellor. If it wasn't, he had been the Lord Chancellor, and because Tony Blair tampered with an awful lot. and I'm afraid I haven't kept up with all of his changes, some of which, quite frankly, were pointless. Lord Falconer gave an opinion stating that the Prince of Wales could get married in a registry office to a divorcee. So I hope that clears it up. Did Blair and Charles strike a bargain, and that's why Blair has got his knighthood at this juncture? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think Blair has got his knighthood before Charles accedes to the throne. And there is no doubt that under the Marriage Act of 1949, together with the various other marriage acts that have been passed since then, including the Human Rights Act, which is what Lord Falconer used to definitively determine that Prince Charles, despite being a member of the royal family, could now marry in a registry office, something that had been specifically excluded prior to the Human Rights Act, which overrode the previous acts. That Charles could marry in a registry office, and he did. The marriage is valid. Judith Payne says, the Marriages Act of 1948 actually forbids the heir to the throne marrying in a civil ceremony, which Charles did when he married Camilla Parker Bowles. Therefore, in my book, they are not legally married. It is also interesting that Blair asked the Attorney General of the day for legal advice on the marriage. The legal advice has never been made public and indeed has been locked away for 100+ years. What are they trying to hide? Well, Judith Payne, thank you very much for your question. I think you're slightly, your question is a wonderful question. And prior to the introduction of the Human Rights Act, there might have been a problem because royals were specifically forbidden from marrying in registry offices. But the Human Rights Act, in conjunction with the Marriages Act of 1949, allowed Lord Falconer, as I said a little while ago, to give advice which was made public. So it's not a secret. The question was looked into, it was assessed, he made a ruling, and the marriage proceeded on that basis. They're not trying to hide anything. They didn't try to hide anything. So I hope that answers the question. Annie Getchagun. I would imagine that's a nom de plume. Dear Lady C, the petition has been presented in the wrong format according to Trevor Colt MC. And despite having 600,000 plus signatures, it won't be debated in Parliament. What can be done? I signed the petition and I've always believed that Blair should be charged with war crimes. I can't believe that he's got the arrogance to accept the knighthood. Do you agree that he should graciously decline? I actually think he should decline. I think that would be the way out for everybody. I think he's been offered the knighthood. He's been offered the garter. I think he could decline. Of course, normally what happens is you're offered an honour before it is made public. And if you decline it, that's the end of the matter. If you accept it, it is then made public. But I think, bearing in mind all that has happened and all that is happening and the tremendous hue and cry that this has caused, I think that the gracious thing for Mr. Blair to do, or now Sir Tony, would be to say to the Queen, I think in the circumstances, thanks for the offer, but if you don't mind awfully, I will decline it. If he doesn't do that, I am afraid we are stuck with Sir Tony Blair, KG. All prime ministers in this country are offered the garter. It has to be done sequentially. You can't deny Tony Blair indefinitely and have all other successive prime ministers given the garter. That's not how the system works. You know, honours are given as rewards and as inducements. Honours are sometimes validly earned, and other times they are simply honorifics. Sometimes they really don't have a moral meaning. If every government only honoured good and honest and honourable people, I'm afraid there would be very few people who were honoured. Certainly very few politicians who were honoured. Politics is a dirty game. I personally think, as I have said before, that Tony Blair and George Bush should be charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. I've always thought it, and I don't think anything's ever going to change my mind. They destroyed a country. They destroyed a country's economy. They have the blood of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people on their hands. If they think I have defamed them, sue me. If they don't think that I have defamed them, or they know that although I have said something that they think is defamatory, but because it's true, it's going to end up in another Meghan Markle situation where even if they win, they get £1 damages or maybe a penny. I don't think they're going to be suing me or anybody else, because if they try to sue me or anybody else, there will be a flood of people who also came wading in saying exactly what I'm saying. They also have Saddam Hussein's blood on their hands. Saddam Hussein was the CIA's man. He was trained by the CIA. He was America's plant. He was given American support for quite a considerable length of time. He fought against Iran on behalf of the Americans and at the behest of the American government. He is then cynically overthrown. Now, I'm not saying that Saddam Hussein was a wonderful man. He wasn't. I'm not saying he didn't commit atrocities. He did. What I am saying is it would behoove both the British and the American governments to ask the Christians in the Middle East what their opinion is before the British and the Americans weighed in with their puerile, naive, mischievous, destructive and murderous foreign policies. Because the Christians in all of these states would have told them, leave Gaddafi, leave Saddam Hussein, leave the Shah. It is better to have somebody who is secular, and yes, all of those governments had human rights issues, but let us not forget, so does America. May I point out Guantanamo Bay? So does Britain. May I point out Abu Ghraib? So, we are not exactly speaking from the point of view of complete innocence. So we cannot afford to be quite so judgmental. And in any event, real politics means real politics. It doesn't mean namby-pamby, oh, the world would be better if. The world will be always infinitely better with a secular leader who stays in power and whose atrocities are against a limited number of his citizens, than one who assumes power and then decides that he is going to, as with the theocracy in Iran, just deprive practically everybody of their rights. So really, people in these countries have a choice, and the Christians in these countries are the ones who are basically vulnerable, sitting on the fence, and therefore are the ones who really know what's going on. They always opt for secular states over theocracies or chaos. Look at what has happened in Iraq. Look at what has happened in Libya. Look at what still happens in Iran. Look at what would have happened in Syria had that gone the way that the West wanted it to go. I hope that I'm not causing too much of a ruction with some people, but the reality is I would sooner see a handful of people suffer than a whole nation. And anybody who thinks that that is a terrible deal needs to understand it's better that a handful of people suffer than practically a whole nation. So, to wrap it up, I would say that Tony Blair definitely is a war criminal. He knowingly went into a war with a fake casus belli. He knew it was fake. Bush knew it was fake. The UN had said it was fake. Everybody who had a brain in their head knew it was fake. That doesn't alter the fact that a British Prime Minister is customarily made a Knight of the Garter and used to be also offered an earldom. The last Prime Minister to accept an earldom, and he did it many years after his Prime Ministership, was Harold Macmillan, who became the Earl of Stockton under Margaret Thatcher. That could be revived. But certainly since then, all prime ministers have been made knights, as indeed have all speakers of the House not only been made peers, but it was almost automatic until John Bercow exceeded his powers until John Bercow abused his powers over Brexit and tried to prevent Brexit by effectively abusing his powers as Speaker of the House, since when the Conservatives have refused to allow him to become a peer. But it doesn't alter the fact that until him, every speaker was made a peer. There's a very good reason why he hasn't been made one, but I'm sure should Labour get him down the road, he will be made one. There are parallels between Bercow being deprived of the customary reward because of his abusive behaviour, and Tony Blair being subjected to a 14-year delay. And yes, if he had a sense of honour, he would decline the honour. I wouldn't advise that we hold our breaths. I, for one, don't intend to, as I'm not suicidal. Chasama Sonatina says, are you forgetting that Blair was forced to resign as Middle East peace envoy? Apart from achieving nothing, it was revealed that he was utilising much of his time in the Middle East, touting for wealthy clients for his own private business. Darling, why do you think he went into the war? You don't think he went into the war knowing that there would not be a quid after there was the pro quo? He should have been sacked. And then there was the EU referendum, tripping over to Brussels at any opportunity to plan ways on how to keep the UK tied to the EU. And even after the referendum vote, he continued to trip over to Brussels in order to further plot on ways to reverse the democratic vote! Exclamation mark. We all know he wanted to sit in the hot seat in the European Union. Yes, I have no doubt that Tony Blair hoped that he would end up as the President of the European Union. I have no doubt of that. And it is a complete disgrace that a former Prime Minister of this country could have abused his position the way he did. He had no respect whatsoever for the democratic vote, but let it be said, he wasn't the only one. Nor did John Major, who was the Tory equivalent. I make that point for what it's worth, just so that we are all on the same page where this is concerned, that it doesn't matter whether you are Labour or Tory in this country. If you are a former Prime Minister, you are supposed to be a believer in democracy. When the people have spoken, it doesn't matter if you don't like what they said. Respect the vote. And if you don't, you are a disgrace to your position. And you're absolutely right. His behaviour over Brexit was totally disgraceful. Totally disgraceful. He had no right, nor did John Major. to try to tamper with the vote, nor did David Cameron, also a Conservative, former Prime Minister. But they did. Disgraceful. But you see, that's what happens when people don't understand their place in life. As a former Prime Minister of a constitutional monarchy and a democratic state, you have no choice but to respect the will of the people. And if you don't, you have shown yourself to be insufficient, to be undemocratic. As simple as that. Ida Coetzee says, perhaps Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, Knight in Blair now, Queen Elizabeth II has re-sparked light on Blair's war crimes, and just maybe The Hague will take on Blair and George W. Bush. The Queen rarely errs and seems to play the long game. Just a thought. Ida Coetzee, I love the way you think. Would be that were true, but I suspect it's not. But if it is, what can I tell you? The Queen is cannier than we all think, but I don't think so. I think she simply understood she had to do it at some point, and with this being her Platinum Jubilee year, this was the time to do it. You know, people bury unpopular news on quiet days. I mean, for instance, the Mail on Sunday, when did it publish its apology to Meghan? On Boxing Day, the day that there are the fewest readers of newspapers in existence. So, I don't think so, but it certainly has shone a light. But do I have any hope whatsoever, that Tony Blair and George Bush will ever be charged with war crimes? No, sweetie pie, that's not going to happen. The Hague is a Western club. It's the regimes that fall foul of the top 5 or 6 nations. The Western nations. Those are the ones. For instance, and I'm not saying, by the way, that the war crimes trials that have taken place at The Hague were not valid and should not have taken place. I have no brief for any of the dictators and the war criminals who have committed the atrocities they did, whether they be Milosevic or Taylor or any of the others. However, it's the juniors who get done, not the seniors. The seniors are allowed to get away literally with murder, while the juniors are punished, and we, the people, are supposed to admire the fact that we live in a society where justice prevails. Well, if justice rarely prevailed, it would prevail for the little man as well as the big man. And it would prevail irrespective of the status of the criminal and the country's size. Don't hold your breath again. Nothing's going to happen. Bush and Blair have got away with it and they will continue to get away with it. They are going to die eminent, covered in honours, and history is going to regard them as war criminals, because they are war criminals. They are right up there with all of the other war criminals. They fabricated evidence to enter a war. And by the way, before anybody in America says to me that this has anything to do with 9/11, excuse me, Saddam Hussein in Iraq had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. The perpetrators of 9/11 all originated, or mostly originated, in Saudi Arabia. Bin Laden was from a very rich and grand Saudi Arabian family, which was allowed by President Bush to be the only flight that left the United States after planes were banned. A plane left with all of the very rich and very grand Bin Ladens who were in America. Saddam Hussein had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with 9/11. How we get from Saudi Arabia and Bin Laden and 9/11 to Afghanistan, and then to say that it is Saddam Hussein, these are leaps of faith that only the gullible or the stupid would buy. They are lies. I hope I make myself clear, and I hope I'm not offending anybody. But if I am, so be it. Because the reality is 9/11 had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein was not invaded, toppled, and hanged. The man was hanged. Gratis, the American and British, etc. invasion of Iraq. You know, very sophisticated internationals have always said the only thing that should make a state more nervous about its existence than being an enemy of the United States is to be the friend of the United States. Not because the American people are not wonderful, because by and large the American people are, but because successive American governments, have proven to be wholly unreliable allies. And when it suits them, they topple their allies in the most disgraceful way possible. I hope that doesn't offend Americans who believe that their government can do no wrong. All governments can and do wrong, including the American, and certainly including British governments, chief of which at the moment has been Tony Blair's government. Wendy Reynolds says, what about Blair advising despots around the world? His secret meeting with Macron to undermine Brexit. Thank you very much for your input, Wendy Reynolds. Yes, Mr. Blair, now Sir Tony, made a great deal of money advising despots. He's in the news at the moment because he advised in 2011 the former ruler of Kazakhstan, who is a dictator or was a dictator, on ways of oppressing his people and circumventing the will of the people and keeping himself in power, and to come up with an exit strategy. Most dictators either die in situ, or they are toppled or executed or exiled. Blair and the Kazakh dictator came up with a new scheme whereby he would hand over power and end up running some of the show behind the scenes. And Blair did his utmost to burnish the man's image brightly. That's just one of the other things that Blair has done. He has made a shed load of money advising despots how to keep in power. That was his reward. He was always going, once he became George Bush's poodle and said, yes, we must invade Iraq. There are weapons of mass destruction, blah, 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 which everybody knew there weren't. Everybody with 2 grains of sense in their head and who didn't have their eye on their bank account. But Blair had his eye on his bank account. He knew his reward would come when he left power. He would coin in the money, and he has coined it in. Ed Fisher says, Blair would have to declare the sources of his income were he to sit in the Lords. Also, it's custom and practice to offer a garter knighthood to previous prime ministers. It's not in the gift of the Queen in reality, as this would make her seem partisan if she refused to give him the knighthood of the garter. That's absolutely right, Ed Fisher. Had the Queen decided that she wasn't going to give Blair, but she then gave David Cameron and Gordon Brown, you would have heard that the Queen was favouring one political wing of the Labour Party over another, and she was favouring one political party over another. So, you're absolutely right. It is a custom, and she has abided by it, clearly, reluctantly. So, Tony, do us all a favour. Show how honourable you are. You say you're a good man. Show us how honourable you are. You say you're an honourable man. Display some honour. Return the knighthood. Mary Welsh says, Lady C, I am American and was also against the war. I have a tidbit for you. My ex-husband was a friend of General Shalikashvili, who you will remember was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff under President Bill Clinton. After he retired and during the run-up to the Iraq War, we had lunch with General Charlie, just the 3 of us. My husband asked his views on the matter. He told my husband that he asked General Powell why he was staying in the Bush administration during this nonsense. And Powell told him it was, quote unquote, to slow the bastards down. We know that he was a good soldier who fell on his sword for his commander-in-chief when Bush asked him to recite their supposed evidence of weapons of mass destruction to Congress. That became his largest regret. Mary Walsh, thank you very much for that. it helps somewhat to vindicate General Colin Powell's reputation, because General Colin Powell was known to be an honourable man, and many people have asked over the decades, why is it that he went along with this? You have provided the answer. Slow the bastards down. But he didn't stop them. And I suppose, as it was his duty to back up his commander-in-chief, he really had a choice: resign or back up his commander-in-chief. In my view, it's difficult to know what I would have done in his position, but I suspect I would have resigned. In fact, I know I would have resigned. So, nevertheless, he obviously had mixed feelings and a sense of honour and decency. Hugh Evely says, I disagree that Blair was a good Prime Minister. And now we're getting on to comments about Blair as a Prime Minister. Apart from the Iraq War, he created devolution which endangers the country's unity. I quite agree. Allowed for unlimited immigration from around the world to suit his political ends. Not sure I completely agree, because the fact of the matter is, most people in Britain don't want to do menial, dirty jobs. Foreigners always do them. It's the way of the world. But anyway, I'll continue. Interfered with the constitutional network of the country. Absolutely agree. Set up a Supreme Court which was not supreme at the time, as it was subservient to the European Court of Justice. Quite agree. But I agree with the explanation relating to the Queen's dilemma regarding the knighthood of the Garter. I will read another comment from Stefan Belkowski. Good afternoon, Lady C. Thank you for your entertaining videos. My pleasure. Just a quick comment regarding Tony Blair, if I may. I feel that Bambi... He was called Miranda at school. I feel that Bambi... Miranda. He's very, very vain, evidently. I feel that Bambi was a complete disaster for this country and has been instrumental in stripping away the social fabric and essence of what it is to be British. This, notwithstanding his willingness to kowtow to pan-nationalism, giving into EU demands, devolution and breaking up communities through the encouragement of council estates within middle-class neighbourhoods, something he no doubt could have taken out of Stalin's textbook. Indeed, alongside Clinton, he was the catalyst in what we have today in terms of wokeism and tradition and social neo-Marxism as exhibited by the likes of Greta Thunberg et al. The Saatchi and Saatchi poster, New Labour, New Danger, was indeed foretelling. Well, Stefan Belkowski, I notice that you have a Polish name. That I find very interesting, and I say that because you address various issues in terms of communism, Marxism, and the Poles certainly lived through terrible times under Stalin, and you also, the Poles are well known to be nationalist, and you also warn against the dangers of pan-nationalism, where under the European Union, everybody was going to be forced to kowtow to the powers that be. And basically, we were all going to lose our identity. I know lots of people will disagree with me, and you are entitled to your opinion. I thank you for your input. In my opinion, it gives much food for thought and is invaluable. Thanks. Nancy Johnson says, I believe Bush and his father aligned with those who can now be seen as globalists. George H.W. Bush and others started the move after World War II, perhaps with good initial intentions for world peace. Unfortunately, they devolved into an elite group who believed they know more than the rest of us. They care more for their power than for our freedoms. I think that's a very thought-provoking comment. And did I tell you, it has been my experience that many people in power care more about power than the rights and liberties of others. Heidi Brinkley says, the Queen has knighted much worse characters than Blair. She certainly has. And I think we need to bear that in mind. But it doesn't alter the fact that the public have a right to make their voices heard and their objections need to be registered and dealt with. Honouring a war criminal is notable, and I think that irrespective of anything else, people should be allowed to make their voices heard. Betty Boop says, Lady C, can you tell me if the information my friend gave me is true? She is the daughter of a British politician, and when I asked her why the UK was blithely following the US into a dodgy war, she told me that the US had provided food, funds, ships, etc. in World War II, and that if the US asked for payment, the UK would have to hand over the keys to 10 Downing Street. Well, that's a likely story, but I'm afraid it's actually complete rubbish. The United States of America forgave Russia its war debt after Russia paid the Soviet Union paid $2 million. It didn't demand reparations from Germany or Japan. Quite right, in my opinion. Reparations have proven to be disastrous over the centuries. They did not forgive the British 1 farthing. It took the British nation until the end of 2006 to pay back the war debt. The United States of America didn't give us anything. They lent us. It was called Lend-Lease. They lent us, and they didn't forgive us 1 penny of the debt. Now, you might ask, why would they forgive the Soviet Union? Successive American governments, incidentally, of both political parties. Why would they forgive the Soviet Union, the enemies, but not their ally? It goes back a century ago, more than a century ago. when the American foreign policy was to dismantle all of the European empires, because America, being a democratic republic, wanted to see all the empires dismantled. One could say they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. The question is, was it a good thing or was it not a good thing? That's an interesting question. Will we ever know the answer? We can speculate till the cows come home, but that's what happened. We're going to end on a light note. Jed Linen says, moving the topic somewhat, what would be your take on BBC journalists wanting to crass the term ladies being used in modern conversational English, and at the same time see a gentleman refrain from holding a door open to the feminine gender? I assume girls would also be viewed as patronizing. Jed Linen, I don't think we should even bother to take idiocy like that seriously. Yes, I know that a lot of the BBC sort of anti-liberalities, I don't know what you'd call them, because they're so illiberal, it's just beyond belief. And they're just change for change's sake is not sensible. Change is only sensible when it is going to enhance and improve. And too much change too suddenly and too quickly causes chaos. Maybe that is the objective overall, because people who have set all segments of society against each other and come up with areas of conflict when there should be no need for areas of conflict. You have to question what their motives are and what their objectives are. I think it's insanity. I think it's stupidity. And I, for one, stand firmly and wait for gentlemen or juniors to open the door for me. When my children were growing up, I would grind to a halt at a door and they would have to open it for me. That's what gentlemen do for ladies. That's what younger women do for older women. I also brought my children up, and we laugh about it, that, you know, a gentleman should always walk on the street side of a pavement, or as you say in America, the sidewalk. There's a reason for it. In the olden days, when horses and buggies and carriages clattered by, if they sort of hurled in one's direction, the stuff that usually comes out of Meghan's and Harry's mouth, it would splatter the gentleman's coat and not the lady's dress. And I always say to my children, go on, get on to the bad side of the road, of the pavement. And they do. And it's a nicety that I would imagine certain old-fashioned, very refined people still abide by. And I'll tell you better, when somebody does it quite willingly, you think, there's somebody who really has exquisite manners. And a lot of these niceties are niceties. They make life desirable. I see nothing wrong in referring to women as ladies, even when they aren't, and to referring to men as gentlemen. The greeting, ladies and gentlemen, is it sexist? It's civilized. As for girls, well, I notice an awful lot of people nowadays, and I even do it sometimes, say you guys when you mean you people, because in England, you people is supposed to be distant, but you guys is supposed to be fine. I mean, these are nuances that sometimes are really quite ridiculous. And I think it behooves us to not cause offence needlessly, but rarely. When you have organisations like the BBC setting about dismantling good manners in favour of bad manners, where a man will swing a door and if the woman doesn't catch it, she gets slammed in the face, or vice versa. I mean, if the woman has gone through the door first and the man is then coming along, and the decent thing to do and the civilized thing to do is hold the door for him. But if he's there first, or indeed if she's there first, he should leap to open the door. And if he doesn't, well, he's not a gentleman. It's as simple as that. I think the whole thing is ludicrous and doesn't bear further comment. And on that note, I will say, I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and keep the questions coming in. And remember, this can't be done without you. God bless and goodbye.